All right. We're not that cool. We can stop with the music. All right. Hey, Nicole, how you doing?
I'm good, James. How are you?
I'm good. To everybody else, welcome to yet another biotech recruiting chat. I am thrilled to be joined with Nicole Stevens of Catalent, who is an employer brander. I love employer brand. If you know anything about me, you know that I love employer brand. So while I want to definitely talk about employer brand in this kind of series of conversations, I want to talk about the entirety of talent acquisition. So we'll be looking for sourcers. We'll be looking for leaders. We talk about all sorts of conversations around biotech and life science recruiting and how special and interesting and messy it is. So that's really what we're all about here. So let's just start with the easy one. Nicole, please introduce yourself and how did you find your way to Catalent?
I love a good layout, James. Thank you. Hey, everyone. Nicole Stevens, like James said, I just celebrated a year at Catalent Pharma Solutions. So I was working at one of the big banks in the US and was really looking for a larger scope of work. So I moved over from social media to employer branding when I saw a need. And then I won't say I get bored quickly, but I like to kind of challenge myself and say, like, okay, what else is out there, right? I've done this. What else can I do? And there's so much to learn in TA and employer branding. There's so many different definitions of it, as you well know, and different ways to approach it. So I said, okay, what else can I do? And one of the challenges of really big organizations where you have 250,000 coworkers is you can't. There's a whole team who does that. And so I was looking for a bigger scope and came across Catalent, joined a completely new industry, and have gotten to get my hands dirty in kind of a lot of new projects and work.
And then let's be clear, Catalent is not some tiny little startup that no one's ever heard of. You've got at least 5 or 6 people who work there, correct?
Yeah, I think we're up to 10 now, double digits. Yeah, we
According
have
to LinkedIn,
about
you're at 11.
15,
So yeah,
about 15,000 people.
yeah, exactly. So you're coming from this massive, and we won't name the bank. It's completely fine. I completely understand ignoring previous employers. There's no need to give them free press. But it's a click away to see Nicole's LinkedIn profile and figure out who we're talking about. But going from such a massive, structured, regulated, let's be fair, as a bank, of all banks, that's probably not exactly the most crazy or chaotic or innovative. It's just a very staid and stable environment. You're coming to biotech pharma, which is still heavily regulated, but it's a different beast. So from an employer brand standpoint, how does that job differ? How does the world of the banking, large scale banking and mid-sized growing pharma kind of shift?
Yeah, I love this question because there are so many differences. Even though it's employer branding work, it's completely different. So the first is name recognition, right? And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. For some people, it's a great company, and for others, it's not. So for better or worse, Catalent doesn't have that name brand recognition. So that's a challenge, but it also gives us an opportunity to really define, like, who are we?
Yeah.
First, we need to figure that out, and then we can share that externally. Another really big difference is resources. So, I managed a budget of $1 million just for recruitment marketing, just for social media. That's not talking about events. It's not even scratching the surface of other things. And when I look back, I'm like, wow, I was so unfazed, James. If I had a campaign and I was like, all right, let's throw, 30K at this. And then I was like, no, we have a bigger budget. Let's throw another 15K. Completely unfazed.
Yeah.
And here I'm like, all right, we have $400. So what we can do is,
I got this roll of duct tape and I got a piece of paper. What am I going to do? Yeah.
Right. And it's so interesting because, we can't rely on, well, just throw another 15K at it, which was usually our answer. So it's something that someone like me really likes because I'm like, okay, let me challenge myself. No one's heard about people have, but people haven't heard of us as much as they have a former company.
Yeah, and they haven't heard of you like a Roche or a Johnson and Johnson. Like I watch TV like everybody else. I don't see Catalent commercials for brands and compounds you've got in the market, whereas I see them for AstraZeneca all the time, and I see them for Roche. And it's like it is a very different model, especially coming from a place where huge consumer brand awareness, historical brand awareness. However, it is a case of live by the sword, die by the sword. As that brand awareness was huge, one or two bad moves, suddenly it's an albatross around your neck.
Well, 100%. And in addition to that, I think, like you said, we are a heavily regulated industry. So is finance, like not a huge dissimilarity there. But while compliance is still, it's king,
Mm-hmm.
even the fun parts of employer brand can be led by compliance in finance. And it's
Talk.
like, can we try this? No, there's risk. Okay, I'm going to need a new definition of that word. But
Yeah.
what I found here is like within the first week, I was like, hey, what if we try this? Oh yeah. And I was like, are you sure? Are you sure? Like I would put it in writing and my boss was like, what are you doing? I'm like, no, I'm just
I'm
documenting.
just covering my
She's like,
ass. What are you doing?
right. She's like, why are you documenting your ideas? And I was like, just, you agreed on like, so I think that is really interesting. And then a differentiator from like the EV perspective is we are smaller, right? I mean,
Mhm.
Lonza is about the same size, but like Thermo Fisher is like 90,000 employees.
Yeah, they're massive.
So we have a different level of resources. We have a different business focus, but we have a lot of people come from Thermo
Hmm.
and, go to Thermo. And the difference in talking to employees is I get a crash course, is how someone explained it once. And I
Mm,
was like, I love that
that's a great language. I
because
like that.
you're the kind of person who either wants a crash course or you don't. So, coming to Catalent means like you're going to get your hands dirty, probably literally, and you're going to get experience that you wouldn't get at a bigger company. But that means, you have to put in the work and be
Hmm.
willing to, adapt and be flexible and all those buzzwords that we love. So it's really kind of interesting figuring out, okay, I'm in a whole new industry. What does that mean? What is a bioreactor? I don't know, actually. Don't ask me.
I know. I know. I tell people, it's
No.
like, I can't even spell mitochondria. Stop asking, right? Just don't even ask me the science stuff.
Right, exactly. So yeah, it's been really fascinating.
So you kind of mentioned this idea, the difference between like a massive pharma, a Thermo, a Johnson Johnson type level, and people coming from there to you. They're taking a step down in size, but they're getting an increased level of impact potentially, or access, or that crash course of, look, you're going to learn a lot of stuff. So where do you balance that from the other side of it? You've got all these biotechs that are 5, 6, 700 people who also offer that kind of level of, look, we're all making it up as we go along, so you better jump in for the ride because we're building the plane as we're flying, so to speak. How do you differentiate from that? You've got this crash course messaging, which I think contrasts directly with Thermo, but and companies like that. But how do you contrast yourself against other smaller companies?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, analogies are not my strong suit, but I'm going to give it a go anyway. So,
Take a
let's
swing.
say we're not actually planes aren't my strong suit either. Okay, forget that. We're not we're not having like this huge plane. It's not already built and shiny, and you just pop in and now you can put X Thermo on your resume next.
Mm-hmm.
But we're also not a 700-person startup that has no resources
Mm-hmm.
because we have 50 global sites. So we offer that kind of global backing. We have experts, PhDs who use words in regularity that I'm like, is that okay? That's a word. Great. So it's like an interesting kind of juxtaposition between like the feel of kind of a late stage startup where you can still
Mm.
try new things. Your ideas are still heard. And, we welcome looking at, you know, uh, just new concepts and new ways of doing things.
Yeah.
But to execute those ideas, you're not doing it on your own. You're not
Mm-hmm.
building the process. You're not, owning everything start to finish necessarily. You have partners in different regions, who can support you. So it's like part late stage startup and part fully baked machine. And it's
Yeah.
this really interesting, like middle where Catalan tends to sit.
Just, and this is just my curiosity, do you still refer to yourself as a startup? And if so, where is the line? When do we stop calling companies startup? And having worked at Roku and it were 6,000 people, they still call themselves a startup. And I'm like, I'm sorry, you're on 16 countries. What are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about.
Interesting. Do you know what? I was watching my Roku TV yesterday and thought of you,
Oh,
and
jeez.
I still associate with them and Universum, but we don't consider ourselves a startup. I mean, I
Okay.
would be hard pressed to back that up as a 15K organization or even 6K. Like
Yeah.
you guys have graduated,
Yeah.
you've made it. You're not a startup. I don't know exactly where that line falls, but I
Yeah.
think as I go to companies that are smaller and smaller, and I say $250,000 to 15K, I am kind of interested in that late stage startup like mentality and how
Yeah.
do we like retain that feel, but yet like kind of offer these resources to really hone that niche of people that will be successful here? It's an interesting question, but no,
Okay.
we're not a startup, but we're trying to like retain some of that, the offerings of a startup.
Gotcha. You just referenced late stage startups. So I wondered if that was still part of their internal vernacular. I guess it sounds like it's fallen off a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are the things that you generally spend your time thinking about, or, some days, let's be fair, employer brand worrying about, right? What is the, where does your brain live most days?
Yeah. Oh, that's such a good question. Everywhere. My brain is
Good conversation. Thanks everybody for joining
it's
us.
right. All right. And that's a wrap. No. Well, that's, like I said, that's why one of the reasons I came here is because I knew that the scope could be bigger. So one of the challenges of a CDMO, contract developing and manufacturing organization, for those of you who, like me, didn't know what the acronym stood for when I applied.
The people who make the pills, sure.
Right, exactly. People who make the pills that go in the medicines and do the R&D, is it's really dependent on business and contracts. And, we get a new client in, and that's amazing. And then we need to staff because we need to
Oh,
develop.
so your staffing is that kind of like hyper responsive to onboarding clients?
Yeah, it can
wow.
be.
Okay.
So if we land a new client, fantastic. All right, we got this client. Oh shit, in a good way, right?
Yeah,
But like,
then reality.
but then we have to staff that. So is it, do we need to reallocate resources? Do we have people in other sites who can temporarily come over? Do we just straight up need to hire? If we hire them, are they going to have work when this project, is done? Are we going to continue this client relationship? So when I joined, I did not understand that.
Yeah.
Right. I was like, okay, CDMO. I was like, I got this acronym down. I know how to pronounce Catalent now, which I didn't when I applied in the first conversation. I said the company about 10 times just to have to avoid talent. But it is really interesting. And then, okay, a client, wraps up our business and then what? So it is very reactive. I'd say that's kind of an ongoing challenge, and that's not specific to Catalent. That's CDMOs in general they're tough for TA. One of the things I'm starting to get more interested in, like as an employer brander and as my career evolves, is like the internal side. So employer brand, this is like my hill.
Okay,
everyone like has their kind of hill. This is mine.
Okay.
So employer brand often sits in talent acquisition, right? Sometimes marketing or comms. How much do we focus on retention?
Yeah.
We're making our job so much harder for ourselves if we ignore or deprioritize retention, right? It's kind of like a basic concept. But the problem is when you kind of get into the day to day and this person needs this and you're supporting this, and then all of a sudden 8 or 9 or 10 hours has flown by and you're like, okay, I'll get to that tomorrow, to next week.
It's important, but not urgent. That's the problem.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, I've been starting things here and there with like focus groups and talking to engaged employees, and I will turn any conversation into like a one-on-one for employer brand. I had tech support a couple weeks ago and it turned into a straight up interview. I was like, so tell me why you stay.
Yeah.
What other companies would you consider? And they were amazing and indulged me, but
no, they were thrilled to talk to somebody. That's an audience who
100%.
Like, just fix it and get out. Like, oh, you actually want to speak to me like a person? Wow, that's amazing.
Right. I was like, oh my gosh, thank you for your help, but we're not done yet. The ticket's gonna stay. Okay, not marking this as resolved. So yeah, I think that's like a huge opportunity as well. So that's where I'm kind of like exploring. Once we get people in, right, this is our message. We're like the startup meets the global, organization. How do we keep them from going to then a startup if they like the aspect or a global org? So it's kind of fun to talk to people and just see like, what do you like? What can we do? What haven't we tried?
So when you're thinking about retention, because I think, yes, there is absolutely connections between. And employer brand is so employer branding is so all encompassing. You can use employer branding to do almost anything within a company, to influence any part of the company. Yeah, I know it's super cool, but at the same time, it's not always obvious to people how pressing this button over here makes this lever go up over there, right? How does having a strong brand over here, which is, hey, we all know it's here to attract more of the talent we want to hire. Good. But how does it keep people 2 years after they got hired? How do you spell that out for someone who's a little curious about how your work over here drives value over there.
Oh, that's such a good question. Candidly, and I'll say this for my last couple of organizations, I don't think we're there yet. I
Okay.
think we're on our way there. One thing we're doing, I'll kind of hard soft
Well,
left.
yeah, you got to stay on the script here. Come on. This is clearly very scripted.
One thing we're doing in terms of like showcasing our team's work and the impact, and I think this is like where eventually we will, it's a 3-person team.
Yeah.
So I think we can like expand the scope of our team, but we are big into like scorecards. So making it easy for leaders who have a million things on their plate. They're like, oh my God, we just got a new client, or we lost a new client, or, whatever's going on. So we're like, okay, great. In 3 slides, this is what our team has been up to. Here are the numbers. We have actually like little ticker symbols, like stock, tape, little green and red arrows that show like quarter over quarter. Here's what we're doing. Here's career sites visits. Yeah, we're doing social posts and that's great. But like, here's what they're driving. Here's what kind of jobs people are looking at, like quick pie charts. So it's been a lot of really like thoughtful work on this team in terms of we're so busy, but we need to stop and take time to figure out like, okay, we've done all this great work. How the hell can we like not condense it, but take a pause and lay it out in a way that someone making a budget decision or, TA leadership can look at it and say, oh, okay, I get what you guys do and why we keep you and, hopefully why you should grow. But I think an iteration of that would be taking on some engagement work and saying, okay, we've had, focus groups with our 9 ERGs and with, X, Y, and Z, and they've led us to this conclusion. So now we're going to take on this project. That's kind of like where we're headed.
Gotcha. So even if you haven't actually created that connection, how do you talk about it? Like someone over in budgeting, someone in the C blank O asked you, hey, you keep talking about retention, but I've never thought of employer brand as a thing that drives retention. How does investing in employer brand create that retention? What's your kind of like reaction to that? How do you go, okay, the reaction happens over here and the output comes over here?
Yeah. Well, my reaction is I'm so glad you asked and care enough to take 1 second to ask. And I know that's not what you're asking, but I think I love a good visual. Okay. So I would probably do some sort of roadmap and say, okay, tell me some of the costs that you have. Like, what's our turnover like? What is, what are some critical sites where our turnovers may be higher or maybe lower? What can we learn? And do a roadmap and be like the ways to get to here. Like, here's where we are. Here's where we are. Here's where we're going.
You do like a visual, yes.
I do. I love a visual. So like, let's make it easier on ourselves, right? We're spending so much time on X. How can we make that easier on ourselves? Okay, well, let's take this on. Like, we can do ABC and kind of just lay out, here are the tactics we can do. We expect this tactic to result in X, initiative or project or whatever. And therefore, by executing that project, we expect that, whatever initiative it is, retention can be, ultimately reduced by 10% by X date or whatever.
Gotcha. I mean, it is a vague, hard to explain, hard to describe. It's super amorphous. I get that. It's challenging. Yeah. So look, it's very easy. Well, easy being a relative term. It's easy to build support employer brand when the company is thriving, when the stock price is just going crazy in a good way, when you're hiring like crazy. But obviously you're in a market where things go up and down all the time, and sometimes in a very public fashion. Yeah. What is the difference in your role and how you see your role and the kind of work you do when things are thriving versus when there's kind of a regrouping time?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's, I think, more visibility on employer brand when we have a need. So when we're kind of regrouping, because when we're thriving and we're hiring and there's so much to do, we're just all so busy. No one's kind of saying, who's this team? What are you doing? Because we're just churning out work and it's all great and things are going well and people are like, okay, great. We're all happy.
Yeah. Patting you on the head. Good job. Keep
right. Great job. So, now we're kind of having a period where we can take a step back and we can breathe because we don't, always take care of ourselves and we're so busy trying to support the entire business. And we can say, okay, what's been working well? what hasn't. And this is some of my like favorite work because we have time to be thoughtful
Mm,
and say, okay, normally we're too busy to look at job descriptions and how they can be better. Well,
yeah.
guess what? We have time now, so we can like do a deep dive, right? I'm a total nerd too. So we can deep dive into job descriptions, job postings, work with recruiters on, what's going well, what in-mail character counts seem to be working, what
Mm,
positioning strategies they're using. And really like, I'm just going to say it again, like deep dive, like data. I'll give you one more example.
yeah.
So every quarter, like I mentioned those quarterly scorecards. So I basically for 2 days, I'm like, no one speak to me. I'm like heads down. I have my candle. I have my French jazz. I'm like, I'm in the zone. And I'm just looking at data. And this quarter, I'll be able to continue looking at that data, but really see like, okay, I don't necessarily always dive into like what time of day we're posting
Hmm.
or what day we're
You're
posting. And I
asking
don't
better
necessarily
questions of the data.
right.
Yeah.
And exactly. And I don't always have time to kind of marry up front end and back end metrics to the extent I'd like to. So now
Hmm.
instead of saying this posted well and we did, 4 L&D posts and yay, L&D team, we're here supporting you. I can say, hey, we drove this volume of applications, but this type of content performed well. So not only how do we do more, how do we iterate and make it better
Hmm.
and really take time to do some competitive analysis. Look at Lonza, Thermo, Baxter, Allison, what's your team doing? But look at other companies outside of our industry where
Hmm.
people might come from and kind of see what they're doing, see what candidates are seeing in the market. So it's really just a time to kind of take a step back, be really thoughtful and intentional about what we're doing, and show continued impact. And this is why you pay us when we're not, hiring like crazy
Hmm.
because we're still helping people across the business.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense going from that reactive to thoughtful, let's dig deeper, let's ask better questions, let's get under the surface of the obvious metrics and numbers. Though
Right.
I'm interested because as you're talking, I'm realizing you come from such a social media background. I wonder how that influences your perception of the work, of the output, of the metrics, how you present it. My experience has always been that 90% of people in these jobs are either recruiters who got sick of doing it in a particular way and thought there's got to be a systemic way of doing it. It's
Mhm.
marketers who go, this is crazy. There's this whole other area that's been unexplored. But social media managers are the new kind of like, pre-existing experience coming into employer brand. So how do you think your social media experience kind of influences how you see the work?
That's a great question. And I did, I had so many years in social, and one aspect of it is transferable skills from social. And, recruiters have this, marketers have this, but we have to be project managers, we have to be creatives, copywriters. I'm in the middle of reading Junior based
Yeah,
on your recommendation, which is
it's a
amazing.
good book. It's a really good book.
It's so good. And so in it, and so I'm going to back up for a second. In addition to kind of being really thoughtful and intentional, one thing I'm working on is like upskilling myself. So not only in employer branding specifically, but like in learning more about the business, having coffee chats with random employees to ask literally, what do you do? Explain it like I'm 5. If you explain it like I'm 10, there's a 50-50 chance. Like, what is a fluid bed? What are we talking about? I don't know. I don't remember that either. So don't ask me. But leveling up. So with social, it's everything's public. So everyone can see my work, from the past X years. So I have
Interesting.
no problem sharing my work because I don't really have an option. So at any time, I try to keep my work in like public places so stakeholders can jump in and be like, where are we with this? Oh, you're working on this. And I think collaboration is the other, like for better for worse, right? Sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, don't touch it. But collaboration too. Like in social, you're working with the whole org and you're bringing in business side and TA side and employee voices and all sorts of different perspectives. And that is essential in employer brands. Like you have to be able to work with interns and C suite and people who know what a computer is and people who are like, oh my God, how do I turn this on? Like me. So I think the skill set of like stakeholder management sounds kind of boring, but it is so helpful in employer brand.
That makes total sense. No, I love that. All right. Nicole, thank you so much for being on this little weird little LinkedIn live chat. I imagine anybody who tuned in got a lot out of this. I know I did. It'll be replayed on YouTube for anybody to watch later. But thank you so much for talking about your experience moving from the financial side to the biotech pharma side. Super appreciate the conversation.
Thank you, James. You are blessed.
All right. We'll see everybody next week. Bye.